Hi, and in this What Blizzard Said, I'm going to be discussing what Ian Hazacostas, the game director of World of Warcraft, otherwise known as Watcher, went over in his live Q&A a couple of days ago. Now, there was a lot of things discussed in here, and they're the sort of things I really like them to discuss, which is sort of philosophy of design. It's one thing to say what's coming up and how exciting that is, and they do a lot of that, and I can throw my own comments on that. What I really enjoy is when they sort of say why they made design decisions, why they're still making design decisions, because then I can have a real discussion about that in terms of things I agree, in terms of things I disagree, in terms of ways I wish they would do it differently. And there was quite a lot of that. And as a result, this one could well be a long one. I'm just warning you. You will know more than me in a way because you'll be able to see how long this is by looking at the video. I don't know yet. I'm just about to start it. Here we go. So first one, let's pick on a couple of quick ones. First one is on secondary stats. Now, there was a big issue on secondary stats before patch 7.1.5 where you could get an item that was like 40 item levels upgrade on what you already had. And you go, oh, wow, big upgrade. But no, not an upgrade at all. In fact, it was so bad. It was particularly true of necks and rings because they have no primary stats. And what this problem was ultimately about secondary stats having massively varied values. Like you might have a secondary stat that's actually your best stat. And another one that is like almost, if not actually, worthless to you. So and with the situation was so bad that some people were getting their first legendary being a neck or a ring, and the legendary effect itself wasn't very good, such as Sephiroth's Secret, which became the meme, and they weren't equipping it because, do you know what, it's just not good enough. So they improved some things in 7.1.5. For a start, they put extra stats on those things, on the rings and necks, and they also tried to retune things such as, in their words, if it's about 10 item levels above what you currently have, it should be an upgrade. Now, to my mind, it should be an upgrade at less than that, but, you know, progress has been made. What they've said is that they think that the overall changes were successful. I would say that it was a step in the right direction rather than being actually successful, but it is certainly true we don't have the same situation we had then, it was literally the case. I remember doing an Eye of Ashara Mythic and getting like an 875 ring. At the time, this was a long time, this was when Mythic Plus was still in its early days. And this was a huge upgrade in terms of item level. But it was no use to me. It had mastery on it, totally worthless. So I kept my much, much lower item level ring. There was a warrior in the group who wanted it. Couldn't pass it to them, of course, because it was the highest item level ring I had. So I wasn't even allowed to pass it on. So that one sticks in the mind particularly. That is much less likely to happen now. It can still happen, much less likely. Certainly not at those item levels. The only time you would turn down something at those item levels is if you're breaking up your set bonus or something like that. Now, they did say that there is one sort of special case with this sort of thing in the Arcano Crystal. I would suggest trinkets in general. If they're going to say it was reasonably successful for armor pieces and rings and necks, I would go, okay, it was sort of, better, a lot better. For the trinkets, though, I would still say we're in the same situation. It's not just the Arcano Crystal, but I will explain the Arcano Crystal. What they said is, that trinkets without primary stats previously, unless they had something special about them, were not really desirable. So what the Blizzard team did, they made this thing without primary stats still, but they over budgeted it. They gave it way more secondary stats than technically it should have. And this is why you actually see, like, if you get an Arcano Crystal, obviously that's, even Mythic Raiders are running with a gym to get that when he's up, if they don't already have it. But, the higher item level it goes, the sort of less proportionally better it is compared to some other trinkets. But even at its baseline 860, it's still a very useful trinket for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who would use it. So, and that's the situation. And they've sort of said they can't really do anything about it without nerfing it, but then that's not fair on the people who put a lot of effort into getting it. Because some people would run, because that world boss isn't up all the time. You can't farm it. So when it's up, people have gone in and used coins and stuff like that on it to get it. And so yeah, they don't want to do that, and that's understandable. So what they've said is it will naturally become less desirable, especially when Tomb of Sargeras comes out and the other trinkets are much higher item level. Remember, although it can Titan Forge all the way up, you've got to be increasingly lucky to do that, because the baseline will always remain 860s, from what I can gather from what they're saying. They have increased baseline item levels of certain things, like they're going to be in heroic dungeons and stuff like that. So from what they're saying, it doesn't sound like they're going to do that for the world bosses. That'll still be a set 860 perhaps, or, you know, as far as they're saying anyway. So yeah, they're just hoping that it would have to Titan Forge up too much to make it worth chasing after Tomb of Sargeras comes out. Now, another quick one is on Relics. Relics are changing fundamentally in 7.2, in that it's a long time since, if you've been playing Legion since the start, it's a long time since you've had to think about researching your order hall. I mean, your order hall is just a place to go to carry on upgrading your weapon or to send off missions. And the missions we're mostly concerned with, of course, are the ones that send us into dungeons and raids so that we can get a cache. But, and for our mythic cache as well, of course, our weekly mythic cache. But research is going to be a thing again. We're going to unlock another couple of levels of research. And part of that research is going to be so that relics that we get will have 2 traits on them, but not 2 set traits. So, as I understand it, you've got your baseline trait, which will remain the same, and then an additional trait which can vary, and it's like an additional trait, totally random. The reasoning behind this is in their own words, is they say, first of all, it'll give you a reason. Like some people at the moment, if they want to run a Mythic Plus, it'll be like, oh yeah, I'd really like to run that one because my BIS trinket, relic drops there. Or no, I don't want to do it. You know, the gear's no good and the relics are no good either. So the argument is that any relic can potentially become good. So, and they've also said it should narrow the gap between the best relics and the worst ones. Now, that last point I disagree with. The first point I'll go okay, because, you know, every time you get a relic, you'll be checking what the extra stats on it, traits is on it, and it might end up being a good one. You don't just look at it and go, oh no, I know straight away it's a rubbish trait because it's from this dungeon. You don't necessarily know. It might have the rubbish trait on it baseline, and it might have, like, your BIS trait on it, just randomly. That make it good. But in terms of the narrowing the gap, I'm not going to say definitely not, but what I am going to caution is I don't think so. And I'll give you an example. They gave an example of Retribution Paladin, by the way. So I'll give their example. They talked about, obviously, our Avenging Wrath traits are our BIS. They're actually worth taking an item level drop for. In fact, I have, all 3 of my relics have that. Now, 2 of them, Holy Relics, drop off a Nighthold boss. So I can have those at quite high item level. I'm not really sacrificing anything for that. But the other one is a Fire Relic. That drops off Xavius. Now, that's at 885 item level. I do have an 895 Fire Relic, same slot, that I keep in my bags because I haven't got the heart to disenchant it. So I'm giving up 10 item levels for that trait, but it's worth it. It's worth it. At some point, I will replace it because the item level of the stuff in Nighthold will just become too big and I won't be able to replace it. But for now, yeah. Now, so if we chase those ones, so what their argument is, we might get a relic that's actually got a poor baseline trait on it, but it's got that one on it, and that actually makes it good, and we can potentially get that off any boss. But let's just forget about that trait for example. I'll still use Retribution Paladin as an example because it's the ones I know the traits for. So, if we didn't have that Avenging Wrath trait, what would the next best traits? The next best trait is largely considered to be the one that buffs Templar's Verdict, which is our single target finisher. So let's say we have some traits on that. That's actually really good. So in a single target fight, that's going to be extra good because we're using Templar's Verdict a lot. On a cleave fight, not so good because we're almost never using it. Maybe we're never using it. So at that point, it's useless. It's actually not just second best. It goes down to useless. As useless as an extra cooldown on our bop. But then we have a trait that buffs our Divine Storm, opposite way round. Now, on a single target boss situation, totally useless, we don't use Divine Storm. But on a cleave situation, really good, because we use Divine Storm all the time. So let's imagine now that you got a relic that had both of those traits on it. That would be really good, because that's useful in both situations. You're not getting the benefit of both traits at the same time, But you are getting, because remember, you can't swap these out like talents from fight to fight. Whatever you put in your weapon, you're stuck with. So now you've got a relic that's actually pretty good for both cleave and single target. Whereas, let's say you have a relic that has reduced cooldown on Blessing and Protection, which is widely regarded to be pretty useless. And what would be another useless one? Well, relatively useless. Reduced cooldown on, say, Shield of Vengeance. That's not completely useless. You can sort of get some use out of that. But it's not brilliant, necessarily. So let's say you have a trait that's got both of those on. They have said, by the way, that it will not be possible to get a double of a trait. So you won't be able to get it doubly good, a double bis, or double worst. So that's out the window. It will never, the random trait will never be the same as the baseline trait. So we can knock that one out. But nonetheless, what I'm saying is I can see a situation where the gap between best and worst actually increases and not decreases. Because all you need for your spec are two traits that are largely considered either useless or of minimal use. And that actually compounds the problem if you get that. You'd be unlucky to get that, admittedly. You'd be unlucky. But still, I don't see that one as being true. That it narrows the gap between best and worst. However, what I do agree with is that it's a good way of getting excited about relics. It's not a case of, oh, that relic's no good for me on that boss. However, it does add, I suppose, an extra bit of competition on the old mythic raid spots. But I'm going to talk about that in another video because they said something about mythic raids that I do want to pick up, but it's such a big thing. I want to do that as a separate video. But before I leave that, I should just note, almost forgot there, that they did say that the extra trait would be one that increases your sort of throughput roll. So I went back to the Blessing of Protection one being bad. So you could have one that has that as its baseline thing, getting a trait that's maybe not so good, but you won't get it the other way around. You won't get one that, say, has a damage increase trait baseline and then suddenly get that as the Blessing of Protection reduction as a random trait. You will only ever... So the random trait will always be good. Whether it'll be the best is another matter, but it will always be one that increases your sort of output, throughput, as they say. So it will always make it better. There's some that will just be a lot better than others. So I should just put that in because that has a material effect on it. Now they also talked at length about artifact power. Now one thing they were talking about is sort of why they came up with artifact power, this idea of a universally desired currency. And this is the key point that needs to be made, and I feel I should make it again. I've made it before. Artifact power, it's not, the situation wasn't like, oh, let's put artifacts in and we can have this artifact power that allows you to customize your weapon over the course of an expansion. That's not why artifact power came in. That wasn't the reasoning behind it. The purpose of artifact power was to avoid the situation in Warlords of Draenor where people didn't want, the content was used up too quickly. They want to avoid that. So situation was they had to have, like a lot of people, myself included, just naturally assumed when Blizzard said we are going to make dungeons relevant again, because that's actually a really good piece of content if you can do that. Dungeons, people are okay doing dungeons. I remember in MOP even, you'd still do your daily dungeon. Even though it was a breeze, you just blasted through. It was a chore, but it was a quick chore, and you didn't mind it. But you got something for it, like Valor points or whatever it was at the time. And I think people just naturally assumed that's what they would do again. But they didn't. They were quite clever. They came up with the Mythic Plus system, which is a really great system for keeping dungeons relevant because you're getting good gear from it as well. And also, artifact power, which, of course, they're keeping relevant. So the purpose of it is to give you an incentive to rerun content. Because let's face it, World of Warcraft is a reward-based game. That's what it is. It's a reward-based game. It's a loot-based game. The same dungeons, if Mythic Plus was a thing, but didn't have the rewards, hardly anyone would run it. It would be like the old challenge mode, people, the only purpose to run challenge mode, initially it was, for like achievements and stuff like that. And of course the transmog stuff. And then people would run it to boost others so that they could pay to get their transmog stuff. And then the only other reason to run it was to get those like realm best times, which a small number of people were motivated to. but it was a small number of people. Loads of people do Mythic Plus. It is a success. It is an actual success. But it is only like that because it offers those rewards. And artifact power was supposed to be the thing that they could give to content that people would always want. Because they can try and say, okay, well, this content we can give this reward, this content we can give this reward, and so on. But they wanted something that just people just wanted. And it would mean that they would never be able to say they've run out of content. Now, the issue has been that some people have reached the end of it. You know, players who played a lot were able to get to the end of it. Now, this is something that Blizzard could have stopped because they could have put a weekly cap on it, and that would have allowed them to manage it. They decided they didn't want to do that, and the primary reason, I'm talking about what they've talked about before here rather than what they talked about a couple of days ago. One of the primary reasons was we know that Mythic Plus is the great source of artifact power, because from raids, yeah, we can run the different types of raids each week. We can only do that once for the artifact power. But Mythic Plus you can keep running. And, or even just, yeah. And they didn't want a situation where the more serious players did all that at the start of a reset, and then there was very little to do at the end of the week. But that's when more casual players still need to do theirs. And they wanted like a source of players to be able to do that. And if we're honest, the sort of players who are likely to leave it to the end of the week are going to have a higher proportion of players who are actually not really well suited for it. And so grouping together is not... You sort of want a disparity, don't you? It's why they give incentives to get raiders, like organised raiders, to do LFR. Because they know full well if LFR was just full of people who need LFR, really, it wouldn't go so well. So what Blizzard had, I say had and have at the same time, is a situation where on the one hand they need this currency that will always be useful, but also they recognise that they don't want people to feel like the more serious players that there's this task to get to the end of it. They don't want an end in sight. But how do you do this? And they want to do it without putting a weekly cap on it as well. That is what, I mean, that would be the simple solution. They want to avoid that. So what they are aiming to do in their own words is with 7.2 to try and change how lucrative content is without it necessarily being all about the artifact power. So we've already talked in the past, they're going to amend the way you get that from dungeons, because they are sensitive to the fact that a lot of raiders are being made to do lots of Mythic Plus dungeons, and it's nice to do a few, and it's not nice to do lots. Well, for some people it is, but for some people it is not. So, like, reducing the amount of artifact power you get, increasing the proportion you just get, because what they've said is, and I've said this before, they want you to just push yourself, not do lots and lots of medium level Mythic Plus dungeons, but actually to push yourself to get the highest level possible, because that directly reflects how much artifact power you're going to get from the weekly cache, which we don't get at the moment, but we will do in 7.2. And they want a much larger proportion of our artifact power to come from that weekly cache. So in other words, better quality rather than quantity when it comes to dungeons. That's what they want us to drive us to do. Now, that's aspirational. Whether that will work or not is another matter. There's a few things they talk about here in terms of this is what we want to achieve and this is how we're going to aim to do it. It doesn't necessarily follow that that's the way people will take. Lots of very, very serious raiders, and I mean the ones who've got a lot of time on their hands, don't have to do anything else in life, or much in life, but can play a lot on here, and those players who are very driven, they will put a lot of extra hours in just for very, very small gains. So if their plan is always that, you know, we're going to dissuade people by making the gains too small for the amount of time spent on it, there are people who will spend that time. And those gains add up after a while as well. Now, they did say that for the majority of players, this current system works okay, which of course it does, because the majority of players are not at 54. But it does create a problem for like mythic raiders. Like when I am trying to recruit people at the moment, we have a situation now where if you're a mythic raider, you should have 54 in your weapon, in your main weapon. That's where you should now be. So when you're looking to recruit people, you might look to recruit people who otherwise might look okay, but their artifact power, they've clearly been slacking outside of raids. You know, these are the players who just try and turn up to raids. Now, they're not ideal. You can always have a few of those in your raid team, if you're honest. It's not ideal because they're not really contributing to the preparation or anything like that. But you can get away with a few. But those few now are like a dying breed, because if they're going to do that, that means their artifact power's way behind. Way behind. Not even at 40, let alone 54. And that is going to affect their output. I mean, if they're just, let's say they're at 52 or 50 even, okay, a couple of percent, it can make the difference, but it's not way, way behind. But if they're on like 40, they are way, way behind. So no matter how well they play, they're going to be significantly behind everyone else. Now, in terms of the way artifact power is assigned, of course, it's assigned to one weapon. I brought this up during the alpha, saying that I foresaw problems that, have obviously materialised. You've got someone like me, I play Retribution Paladin, so I play a DPS and I have one DPS spec. The same would apply to a number of other classes. So we can get 54 with much less artifact power needing to be spent than, say, a rogue or a warlock, who might have 3 artifacts that they need to rotate between for the same role. And of course, with Blizzard tuning and retuning, it's not clear. You can't just get away with one spec. You never could in raiding. You always really need to be able to switch between a couple. Ever since being able to switch between specializations became a thing, and as a result of that, you are at least forcing them to play 2, but then really 3 just to make sure. Now, what Ian said there is that it would feel weird if you'd been concentrated on one spec and then switched to another and that artifact was all fully powered. No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't feel weird at all. So that thinking behind it doesn't wash. If they're going to say they've made this decision from a design point of view because they wanted to increase the length of time it takes to get your artifact power, because they want the artifact power to be a never-ending thing, which I think is the truth of the matter, that's fine, say that. I still disagree, because I still think it's harsh. Anything that unfairly victimizes a strong word, disadvantages some players over others, I am not okay with. I'm not okay with that. And this does. It clearly creates a disparity. It's not a fair thing to do at all. And I worry that it can create a situation where people are less inclined to play the pure DPS specs when we're already got a shortage of them, really. I certainly have. I can't recruit them. But over ones who maybe only have to concentrate on one because it's much easier and quicker to build up the artifact power on a single weapon. So I disagree on that one. I think it would be much better if the artifact power was for the player, the character, and then all the weapons got equal. I mean, you could always argue that, if people delayed getting their additional artifact powers, they would be a little bit behind. But it'd only be a little bit behind, wouldn't it? Because you would get... I mean, you can get them all as you level, and it's sensible to do that. But, it should be assigned to all your weapons equally. I argued that right early in Alpha. I still think it's this case. I still think it's the case that the majority of players would be in favour of that. But this reasoning that it would feel weird, no, it wouldn't. Don't give me the class fantasy rubbish on this one. It wouldn't. But the other thing they have said is, in terms of multiple artifact weapons, they do want a situation where if you have to spread it over several, you're not that far behind. Now, what's caused the real problem with this? It's the same thing that's caused the problem with this huge disparity between people who can play a lot and people who can't. And I've covered this before because they have covered this before. It's that as you were getting artifact knowledge levels, the fact that the amount of artifact power needed sort of increased exponentially was smoothed out. Because if you have someone who every day can run 10 Mythic Plus dungeons, as well as do all the world quests that award artifact power, as well as do at least the daily heroic dungeon as well, because that's a nice tasty boost, and do all the raid content. And then you've got someone who plays more casually, but they play every day. They come on and they do enough world quests to do the emissary quest. They do a heroic dungeon. Maybe they do a mythic dungeon, but they don't really do raiding or stuff like that. The difference in artifact level between those two players, as soon as the artifact knowledge finished, because they would both finish that at the same time, massively increased. There was always going to be that other person who was playing lots was always going to be ahead, but not so much ahead. But as soon as artifact power stopped, artifact knowledge, stopped, then the gap increased massively. But so what they wanted to do is to, and the same thing applies to people putting it across 3 weapons, or even 4 if you're a druid. But I'm talking about pure DPS classes mostly. 3 weapons. Now, and the same thing happened. But so what you ideally want to do is to keep artifact knowledge going up and up and up and up and up. So they're hoping that in 7.2 the problem will be slightly alleviated by the fact that there will be more artifact knowledge levels. But they will still cap. My issue is with that, they will still cap. The only way to solve this is for it never to tail off, for artifact knowledge always to increase. And yes, okay, you get a new character or someone starting the game new, they need some catch-up mechanic. Now, the character is easy because we can already buy them now, something that was really good in 7.1.5. We can buy our characters, like a tome that's 5 item levels behind, 5 artifact knowledge levels behind our own, and it boosts them right up. And that's going to increase as well. We're going to be able to get one that goes up to like 35 in 7.2 because the artifact knowledge goes up to 40. But for a new player starting the game, what have they got? All they've got is a reduced amount of time to do the research on the artifact knowledge. They need a big boost as well. They need a way of really catching up with it. I mean, I suppose it would be no bad thing if it was like you could do an artifact knowledge research every day if you were a new player. That would help, actually. But for my money, there needs to be no cap on the artifact knowledge. Has to keep going. To the point where, yeah, you'll get 1 million artifact power from like a tiny little, one of those tiny little treasure chests around the world, if you still haven't found all of those, which I haven't. I'm waiting till flying comes in. Okay, yeah. But that's the only way to sort of stop that. Because otherwise, yeah, it's just going to tail off again. Unless, of course, they're planning that 7.3 comes out so soon after 7.2 that by the time you've got to... Because how long would it take? We're going to get another 15 artifact knowledge levels. And if you start at the beginning, it's like 5 days between each one, isn't it? Am I right about that? Pretty sure it's 5 days between each one. So that's 75 days. That's like a month and a half. 2 months and a half, sorry, behave yourself. 2 months and a half. No, there's going to be a good... It's double that. So we're going to have a good 3 months at least, let's say, where we're at 40 artifact knowledge. And again, it'll just tail off. Now, the other thing we had is, obviously, it didn't... In terms of our artifact knowledge traits, we had 34 that did things, and then the 35th up to the 54th, and that was 20, were just increasing the power of our weapon. So the what Blizzard have sort of said is they're doing another one like that, and they're tuning it, because that one's going to go away. If you didn't already know, that one's as soon as 7.2 comes out, those 20 points, or up to 20 points that we have just boosting the output of our weapon, disappear completely. We have the artifact power like reinstated, so that'll just go on the weapon. It's refunded, and then we get to spend it on the new traits. But there is going to be a new like sync, I suppose, for when you've got all those traits filled out. But they said they're still tuning it, but they don't want it to be quite the same. They want it to be a situation where you look at how much artifact power you'll need for it and decide that you're going to be better off doing something else. The problem with that thinking is that there are players, and I say serious raiding players, who can do it all. So what they're presumably arguing is, well, do this content instead because you've got a chance of a better piece of gear. That might do you better than 0.5% extra output. But there are players who can do both. They've got enough time to do both, to pursue both things. And again, the difference in player that can do that, you're just going to create a situation where the players, and I don't just mean it like, because you're used to this in raiding anyway, like the top 20 sort of guilds are the ones who can just, they're skilled players as well. I'm not saying they're just bad players who've got a lot of time on their hands. They're not. But they have got a lot of time on their hands. They have to. You're just going to increase the amount of time you have to put into it to get even a modest achievement for raiding. That's my concern with it. It's not necessarily an inevitable concern. It's just that is my concern with this. They need, the only way to do it is to cap it, because this thinking about, oh, they'll decide it's not worth it, is a complete fallacy. Let's say it takes you 2 hours to get 1,000,000 artifact power. And then it takes another 20 hours to get the next 1,000,000. There are players who will spend that 22 hours to get the 2,000,000 artifact power. They will spend the 2 hours getting the first 1,000,000, and then they will spend the 20 getting the second 1,000,000. They will do that. Because although it's not as efficient, if it's the only way to do it, they will do it. And Blizzard have got to get out of the mindset of thinking all players won't do that. They will. Some of them won't be able to. There will be more players who would like to do it than can do it. And so that's a real issue. So their sort of psychology is failing, I think, a little bit on that one. But time will tell, but I strongly suspect that it will tell that. So, we've gone on for quite a while there. That's taken a good half an hour. I'm going to leave it at that one for now. I'm going to take a bit of a break before I do the other one. This is going to be the last one for now. I'm going to do a part 2 where I discuss the other things like legendary items and a bit of mythic raiding as well. And then I'll do a third one where I just focus on the mythic raiding side of it. It'll all still be coming out this weekend. But I hope you found it interesting so far. I have gone on a little bit longer than even I thought I would. So that's why I'm just calling it here for now. But thanks for watching. And if you did enjoy it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for the further content. And until next time, I'll see you later. But not too much later.